Hey guys. So with that introduction, here we go. So this is sort of a crazy title. We have how the classic fairy tale inspired the mobile ad strategy. You're going to understand exactly what I mean by this in just a second. Let me first explain who I am. I'm with True Impact. We're a neuromarketing company from Toronto. We've been at this for about 5 years. I've personally been involved with the company for about 3 years, but I've been doing research for about 8. So I started with bioinformatics, where we take huge amounts of genetic data and turn it into predictions that help us inform biological experiments. And then with neuromarketing, I've been actually taking large amounts of brain data, converting it into predictions that help us create better relationships between brands and customers. And this screen keeps disappearing, so sorry if I keep looking up. On this particular project, I got to work with a company called Receptive. They are a mobile video ad advertising platform company. That's a big sort of a mouthful, I'm sorry about that. But they are an industry leader, and it is a huge industry. At least it's going to be huge in the next 4 years or so. It's slated to be about $25 billion worth. This is one of the first types of studies like this that was done, and it's about time because it's such an important thing that we start to understand not just how does advertising impact us, but how does it impact us particularly within each of the platforms that we are using. So what exactly are we talking about with this fairy tale stuff? We as people tend to classify everything. From a very early age, we are told that certain behavior leads to good characters and certain behavior leads to bad characters. And we use this in our life to easily identify this is going to be good for me, this is going to be bad for me. As children, you know, don't take candy from strangers, that kind of stuff. So let me press forward. Okay, here are some examples. Hopefully you guys know these examples. They're pretty popular. What are good guys? What are some of the behaviors that we associate with good people? They are giving to those in need. We are told that honesty is very important. This is a little bit of a dark picture, but it's basically Ariel rescuing Eric from a drowning accident. So they are heroic. They are rescuers. They're helpful. They're kind to little helpless creatures, and they tend to be very, polite. So what are bad characters? In the top line, you'll see 3 of pretty much the exact same thing. This shows up all the time. They barge into the room and just take over. They show up uninvited to various events, like birthday parties, to people's houses, and they do what they want with the space. They tell people this is what's going to happen. They force their will on others. So you see here, the princess is sort of reaching to touch something she doesn't want to touch, but she has to. They're vain, they're full of themselves, and they're very self-serving. So sometimes they might be nice, sort of in the case of Jafar, he's a very nice to the Sultan, but he's very self-serving at the same time. Okay, so these are the basics. We identify this as children, and we know for ourselves, for our safety, when we find this in real life in other people, good versus bad. So this should be pretty easy. Is Cinderella a good guy? Hands up if you think so. Okay, most of the room thinks Cinderella's a good guy. Anybody think she's a bad guy? Nobody. Okay, interesting. Of course she's not a bad guy, but she does some things that are not necessarily considered good behaviors. She shows up to this ball uninvited. She takes over that ballroom with the prince the whole night. It's just 2 of them dancing. Nobody else is in the area. And then on top of that, she's here via trickery. This is not her true self. She's been made over with magic, this deception. Why is it a good thing? Well, she's the protagonist. We as the audience identify with the protagonist. So whatever it is that she's doing that is not exactly good, we still consider good because it's in our or her benefit. So this is going to be important just a little bit later. How can this help us understand how to approach an advertising strategy? We have to understand that if you're inviting yourself into somebody's mobile world, it's not like you're being on television. On television, we expect strangers, and then strangers interrupting strangers doesn't matter. When it's in the mobile environment, this is personal to you. You're asking somebody to come with you You're asking somebody to take you with them in their social network where they're talking with their friends. You're right there beside their friends. Some people take their phones to bed. They play a game right before they fall asleep. You want to be in somebody's personal space to that degree, you have to actually be a friend for them to see you in a positive way. So we want to create content that people want to interact with, and so create better relationships with those customers. So our idea here is you humanize the customer, you treat them as a human being, and this will, in fact, impact your bottom line better. Okay, how does marketing research work? Normally, we gather lots of demographic data. You have gender, age groups, what was clicked, what was bought, how much was bought. But with neuromarketing, we're trying to get at the why. Why did they click this? Why was it bought? And this helps us get a 360 understanding of the person. Sort of like when you're studying for a test, it's not enough for you to just get the facts. You might do well in a test because you'll know the answers to the questions that you expect. But when you're in the real world, the questions are not expected. You need to understand where that knowledge came from, how it was acquired, in order to be able to apply it to a real world where the world is unexpected. And the best way to do that is to use neuromarketing. How do we do that? So we have neurometrics, we have biometrics, and in addition to that, there's also remote surveys that we can do, which are sort of like testing how your response rate is, or word association tests, that kind of thing. When it comes to neurometrics, there are 3 different readings that we are looking at. Do you like something? Are you thinking hard about it? And are you emotionally aroused by it? When it comes to biometrics, we're looking at eye tracking. How long were they looking at something? What exactly were they looking at? We're looking at facial expressions. What is their face actually experiencing at this moment? Heart rate, skin response. And the real power comes when you combine multiple technologies together. So it's not enough to know that somebody was looking at something for a longer period of time. You have to know what they were thinking, right? Because they might have actually been looking at it because they were confused, not because they liked it. So when you combine the neurometrics and the biometrics, you get a 360-degree understanding. So with this, we were working with Receptive, as I mentioned earlier. They're an industry leader for a reason. They treat the customer as a human being with their approach to mobile advertising. They're very polite with it, and I'll explain that in just a second. And this goes in line with the marketing strategy challenge, where you want to be seen, and once you're seen, you want to be relevant. Once you're relevant, you actually want to be chosen. The only way we get to past all 3 levels is to make sure that each one of those levels is a positive experience. This is our team, True Impact, that's me. This is our CEO, Diana Lucacci. She's currently in Toronto, very busy. She's the Canadian Neuromarketing Chair as well. She's got a background in psychology and marketing. And we were also paired with a European company called Neurons. They did all the data processing on this particular project. So what we did here was the neurometrics, the biometrics, and then we also did a survey to see if we could capture any additional information or if there was anything that was not the same. This is basically what a procedure looks like. You have their neurometric data coming from this headset, which is academic grade. Those are electrodes getting clipped in. And then on top of that, we have Tobii 2 glasses. There's 1 camera looking out into the field and 4 cameras looking back, tracking where the pupils are. And then you have somebody experience something, and all the data is then monitored with computers and captured in this way. So we tested 2 different mobile ad strategies. One was the one by Receptive, and one was your typical standard pop-up ad. There were 62 participants, which is twice the standard for a neuromarketing study. They were evenly divided between males and females. There were 2 different brands that were used. One was a confectionery brand, one was a big beer brand. And they were told to come in and just play a game. They weren't told that any ads were going to be shown because we wanted to get a genuine reaction from people. They played for about 15 minutes, and during this 15 minutes, there's some very engaging music happening, and every once in a while, an ad shows up. I personally got to experience about 18 hours of engaging, happy music, so I had a great time doing that. This is what a typical ad looks like. Most ads look like this in your games. They are horizontal. You have a bunch of things in the corners. There's an X button, and there is a sort of a progress bar at the bottom. And this is what the receptive ad looks like. You see that it slowly shows up. Behind that is your game. It's still there. You know that you haven't left it. It's in the same orientation as your game. You don't have to rotate your screen to see it. And it only comes to you when you are in need. So for example, you need some bonus points to be able to acquire something in the game, or you've just died in the game and you want to continue from the same place as you just were. The ad shows up, says if you could do that, you just have to watch this ad and you make a decision, yes, no, okay. You know what, it's cheating, but I don't care, because sort of like Cinderella, you decided, for me, it's okay. You press, you watch the ad, you get what you want. Okay, key findings. The receptive ads actually had continual engagement. There was a positive reaction to them, and they were more visually engaging. They had more visual time on the ad. Let me start with the cognitive load. This is how hard your brain is working. If you're thinking too hard, you're stressed. If you're not thinking enough, you're bored. If you're thinking just the right amount, it actually correlates with memory encoding. So as long as you're paying attention to this, you're going to remember this for later. It's important for your advertisers that the content they're showing you is actually going to be remembered. On the left side of this panel, you'll see the pre-ad time. In the middle is during the ad, and at the right is after. So the red line being the pop-up ad, you see a huge dip during the advertisement. This is indicative of the mind completely tuning out. So the ad shows up, the mind disappears, the game comes back, the mind comes back in. With the receptive ads, the mind stays engaged throughout. So whatever ad is showing up, they're thinking about it. Okay, 8 times more, in fact, than the pop-up ad. When it comes to motivation, something really strange happened. In fact, we just went, WTF, what's happening here? You'll notice that the red pop-up ad looks like it's doing a little bit better during the ad. Clearly on the right side, you can see that it's doing really poorly afterwards. But in order to make sense of what is actually happening with motivation, motivation being your tendency to approach or avoid something, do you like it, do you dislike it? This is correlated with future behaviors such as purchasing intent, for example. So in order for you to be able to understand this, let me explain it with this. Interstitial ads received 1/3 the amount of time that people spent with the receptive ads. So with only 7 seconds, that data was captured. In addition to that, if you look at the heat maps with the interstitial ads, which are the horizontal looking ones, you'll see that the red dots are in the corners. So people are spending their time just looking for the X button. This is what the industry calls a race to X. It's very unfortunate, but they're not paying attention to the ad. In the receptive ad, you'll see that on the first panel, there's a little skip button. They notice it, they decide, nah, I'm okay with it, I'm gonna keep going. And they end up watching the ad. You can see that there's not a whole lot of red spots because there's just so many things to look at, but they're spending a lot of time with the actual brand content. And so when we go back to the motivation, we can actually understand what's happening here. That slight increase in motivation that's happening for the pop-up ad is actually an increase in motivation for finding the X button. They're excited to get out of this. And what happens after they've done this, their motivation goes way down. They've hated this process. So what does it say when you've left your customer worse off than when you found them? They've associated your brand with a really negative experience. In addition to that, people do not want to rotate their phones. This ad insists, rotate the phone, and people are going, nah, not interested. 65% of these ads were experienced vertically. And if they're experienced vertically, you'll see the heat map looks like this, pretty much looking for the X. For those few people that did rotate the phone, they did end up viewing the ad. Without the rotation, this ad is useless. Whatever financial transaction occurred because of the ad viewing has been wasted. So in summary, I want you to think differently depending on the context of the ad. I think it's very important to acknowledge the space you're in. Consider the ad delivery and the context, and on top of that, treat that other person at the other end of the phone like a human being. It seems like it's normal, but people often have this answer, they're not viewing it, put more ads in. they're not buying, get more links in the window. That's not the answer, right? The answer is be polite about it. Get them to accept you as a friend. And I was, in the creation of this presentation, I was reminded of a story. It's sort of the reason, why do these princesses always fall in love with the princes that rescue them? Like, is that a real thing? I was reminded that when I was a child, my mother took me to a neighbor's house, and it was an old lady, and as old ladies do, she gave me some hard candy, and I took it. I think I was about 2 years old. And I started to eat, and I guess I didn't know, and I just swallowed it. And I started to choke, and my mother was on the other end of the room, and she just took 3 large leaps, and she grabbed me by the foot and slapped me, and the candy went flying across the room. And she saved my life. And that's, like, my mother's not just my hero, like people say, my mother's my hero. She physically saved my life, So whatever her faults are, I can't fault her, right? I mean, obviously she's your mother, but in addition to that, it's just like this extra event, any sort of level of kindness that you show somebody, it adds value to that person's life, and they always remember it. So humanize your customer, add value to their life, and this will impact the bottom line. Thank you.